When did you first see a delta wing?
Probably about 70, 71. 71 I probably started getting into hang gliding.
Was that water skiing or foot
Initially it
launching?
was,
Yeah.
towed behind a boat, self-taught. It was exciting.
Had you been flying the flat kites, the pinhead
No.
kites? No.
First one was the double cone type.
Do you remember who you got into that with?
It was a Bill Bennett originally.
Oh, it was a Bennett glider that you
Yeah.
had? Yeah. When did you actually start foot launching them? And
Well, what happened was the guy who owned the boat that used to tow me sold his boat.
okay.
And because the thing would glide, a friend of mine said, why don't you build a bigger one and jump off a hill? So I did.
Where did you do the...
First started in the Kernell sand hills. Well, actually it was a big grass hill, much higher than the sand hills that they later trained on. And used to get little short soaring flights there. Then later on, down around the hills around Kiama, Saddleback Mountain, which is about 1,800 feet, and so on.
Were there many other people flying at that point?
Well, initially just myself, and a couple of mates eventually got hang gliders, got me to build them, and it just grew from there. And one day on my way home from the south coast, it was a nice southerly, and I thought, oh, I'll call into Stanwell Park and fly off there. And the first time off there was just a glide down to the paddock just below.
Yeah.
And the next time that I took off there, it was quite, reasonably strong. I didn't go down. I spent an hour. The longest flight prior to that was probably 10 minutes on some of the hills around Kiama. But
Yeah.
the flight off Stanwell Park, actually on the very first flight, I landed back on top. And then the two mates that flew with me, one chap, John Ravel and Ray Ryan, after I got airborne, they both flew, and just went from there.
That must have been quite a revelation landing back at takeoff.
It was certainly easier than flying down the bottom and tacking out. I wasn't looking forward to that.
That's so. I'm aware that there was people flying up on the northern beaches earlier than that. When did you start to run into other pilots? Or?
Well, the first hang glider pilot other than myself and the guys I'd made them for was another chap by the name of Steve Moyes.
Yeah.
And he'd, I don't know where he got his design from, but he was trying to fly off a 3-foot sand dune. And he was just going whomp.
Little steps.
Little steps. And I've known him since the 70s, and he never really made a real hang glider pilot. I think he flew off Stanwell Park about once or twice in his career, but been a good friend ever since.
He built his own?
Yeah, designed his own.
You say you built a couple for your friends then?
Yeah, and probably the first hang glider, the first real one that I sold to a person that was unknown, was a chap by the name of Terry Gallagher, who lived on top of Saddleback Mountain, or nearly at the top, and a property there. And we used to ask him if we could launch off out of his veggie patch. And he was so fascinated with it, he bought a hang glider. Well, that was an interesting experience, teaching him to fly.
Yeah.
Because really didn't know much about how to teach people to fly in those days. But he never got hurt, and he flew for many years.
To go back a little, the Bennett glider you had, was that a 13-foot thereabouts?
Yeah, 13-foot ski. Or
80-degree nose angle?
Probably was.
Probably.
Yeah.
The one you then built from there, what sort of size was that, do you think?
I think it was about 16 foot on the leading edges, about 90-degree nose angle.
Yeah.
And from that one I developed a production hang glider, which is pretty much based on on that 90-degree nose angle, and made 3 different models based on that technology, or actually, the first model was a straight cone shape, but from then on I stayed at 90 degrees, but then started putting airfoil shapes in the later series, which was known as the SL195 and the 220.
The SL195 was the first glider I ever picked up.
Okay, it had some sail shaping in it rather than relying on the cone shape.
How were you putting that sail shaping in that?
That was done in the leading edge profile. It had a curved leading edge, but when you slide it on the tube, which was straight, it then formed an aerofoil shape.
Oh, okay.
And then
so you had this, it's like a concave, so it's pulling the top of the cone down a bit flatter.
well, it actually, yeah, it changed. There was some seam tapering.
Yep.
The actual details I can't remember. And then they were reasonable hang gliders for for their time, but I wanted to make something that performed better, and made a couple of prototypes which were a bit unstable, no good for production of course. And then I came up with the SK profile, went out to 120 degrees and used full seam shaping and formed a heavily reflexed wing section.
So full seam shaping, you mean?
Not only was the leading edge had shaping in it, but every seam was had
Every
shaping
fore or aft seam.
Yeah,
Sort of like a waist or something
yeah,
like that.
they were wasted and to provide, tightening and to form this reflex wing section.
So basically there was an airfoil, it wasn't?
It was a full airfoil type setup.
I know I've luffed the Chevron A. You could go through to climb right up and grab the nose plate, the nose wires, and it would come down vertically, not pointing vertically, but you would drop vertically and still air. The whole thing would be shaking like anything, but you let go of the wires, catch the A-frame as it came through, and you would land. It was a great way of getting into a... But everyone that watched used to say, "Oh, you're crazy, that's a luff die, you'll kill yourself." And you go, man, the positive pitch all the way down, you never ever... And that's the same thing there.
Yeah, we used that technology right through all the models. The only thing I discovered between the prototype SK, the sailmaker made a mistake, and the leading edge pocket was sewn the wrong way. Formed a big bubble on the leading edge. And that particular SK had perhaps twice the performance of the production ones, which we cleaned up. And it took me another 12 months to really discover that this was a tubular flow leading edge on the prototype SK, where the others had clean entries.
Yeah, yeah.
And that particular hang glider was exceptional. It handled beautifully and outperformed all the production ones. And it wasn't till I think that we called them the Skydart series that all had this blown leading edge or tubular flow leading edge.
Okay.
Also used it on the training hang gliders, which had 200 odd square feet and were phenomenal sand dune soarers compared to anybody else's hang gliders.
My first glider I bought was a Super 2, or that's what it was called.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It looked like the SK1 but with an extra batten, a bit larger.
That's right, I forgot about that series. There was this, Super 2 was a higher aspect ratio. I don't know whether it had the blown leading edge or not. I don't think I discovered that until the Skydart series.
Yeah. So after the Super 2, was that the Skyhook?
No, the Skyhook was a big version of a Skydart.
Oh, okay.
For a big floater. But the Skydarts, from the Super 2, which was a higher aspect ratio than the SK series, and a little bit more in area. Then I went to the Skydart series. There were two sizes in that, and then the Skyhook was a big version meant for just high performance floater type hang glider.
1976, Terry Delore won the world champs on one of your gliders. Which one was that? Do you remember?
I can't remember actually.
Okay. I sort of had it in my head it was a Skyhook, but
It's possible it was a Skyhawk. I just don't remember.
so after that was the Chevron.
Chevron was, yeah, because of the competition area, they wanted bigger gliders with lower sink rates and better LDs, and
Yeah.
it was probably one of the last ones I designed.
There was the A, then the B, and my memory was a 30% called a wedge tail or something.
Yeah, it never went into production.
Yeah. I only recall, I think, seeing one of them turn up. Mentioning Terry Delore, how did you come to have him as your dealer?
That was quite a fluke. I was in New Zealand, and parked on top of the hill thinking, "Oh, this looks like a reasonable site to fly off." And I was with my cousin from New Zealand, and within probably 20 minutes of arriving on top of this hill thinking, yeah, it looks like a good spot, the local hang gliding group of New Zealand turned up, probably 20 of them. They built homemade hang gliders, and it was quite an experience to see them fly because they had glide slopes about as steep as the hill. As a matter of fact, I remember one guy going so steep he had to run along the spur halfway down. Not one of them landed in this big open park area. They were into trees and people's backyards, and this is amazing. So I flew I think that was back in the days of the SL series hang gliders. Yeah. And the wind was quite soarable, and I flew around for about 15, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, it's hard to remember, and landed down next to the car. And at the end of the day, I just picked one guy out of the crowd and said, "Do you want to be my New Zealand agent?" It just happened to be Terry Delore. You know, I think he was about 14 at the time.
Yeah.
And no known reason why I chose Terry.
It was a pretty good choice.
It was a good choice. One of those inner feelings, maybe.
Okay, Steve, when did you actually form Ultralight Flight Systems and get serious about making aircraft?
Probably about 72, I'd say 72, maybe 73.
So that's you set up a bit of a factory, or you started in the shed somewhere?
I started at home initially. Just trying to think. I had a small factory at a place called Hurstville, and then later on moved to Tarrant Point, and where things really boomed. At one stage there, I think we were 7 months behind in delivery.
How many sort of people were you employing, do you know?
Probably between 6 and 8, all based on a casual basis. They come and go as they liked.
They'd be hang glider pilots, I suppose.
Of course.
You're not going to get much else but casual. Oh, the wind's blowing by.
Yeah, that's right. Some of them used to start work at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Just to make sure they could get out of there if the wind came up. How many gliders do you think you were producing a year or anything like that? Any figure?
I think in those days about 30 a week.
That's a fairly good. So I know they were coming to New Zealand, and I see gliders that look awfully like them in British magazines too. So
I think it was about the Skydart or Super2 series. I had trouble supplying. You know, 7 months behind delivery was, allowed anybody to walk in and they could copy my hang gliders. Well, one chap went to England with one of my hang gliders and got a job in a factory there, and that's what they produced. It's just an identical copy.
There was a French guy, Danis, that also was known as a bit of a Xerox machine, and he's even kept the SK1 label on them in his ads.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? No, I can show it to you, a copy of that ad.
One of the techniques we used in the SK series and all the production ones was, although they had complex seam shaping, I used to get the sailmaker to actually cut the fabric in the shape and sew the seams parallel. So to look at it,
They just look like straight.
they look like straight cuts. So
I was never aware on those gliders of that until you started telling me about it. So
yeah, it was a technique. So the average sailmaker said, "Oh, well, they're all parallel seams, all the shaping's in the leading edge." But in actual fact, the sailmaker cut those seams to form the aerofoil shape, sewed them parallel, so the people that copied them assumed they were parallel seams. There was no shaping there. So that was a technique to.
the copies weren't exactly.
And many people made copies that didn't perform anything like the SKs and later series.
Now the SK, I heard you looped that.
Yeah, many times.
These were positive G loops?
Yeah, all positive G loops.
Yeah.
15 in a row off the top of threadbow once.
Another thing that I've heard is the balloon drop. You probably one of the first people, I understand.
Yeah, there was, I think it was called the Aerostat Society. Both Bill Moyes and I were invited to come out and drop off their balloon. Well, Bill Moyes didn't show, so I was it. And anyway, during the drop, which was pretty frightening, about probably only 4,500 feet, I think it was, I thought I'd better go and land near a road so I can get a lift back. The first car that came along was Bill Moyes.
Did he congratulate
really
you?
Annoyed. He was really annoyed because he saw it happen.
Yep. Bill did rather like being
first.
When did you come across Bill then? Because he was building gliders before that.
Yeah, it was, I'd probably been flying at Stanwell Park was my favourite haunt. And came down, I remembered, the middle of the week expecting to find no one there. Well, by that time there were a lot of hang glider bums around, and there were about probably 6 or 8 of us when Bill Moyes showed up, and that would have been 12, maybe 12, 18 months after I'd been flying off there.
Yeah.
And I actually showed Stephen Moyes, he was the first one, the Moyes to fly off. I showed him where to take off and, you know, where to go and where not to go. But,
so you're basically, as far as you understand it, the first person to fly Stanwell Park?
oh, other than Lawrence Hargrave.
Okay, that's fair enough.
And he didn't really fly off the hill, he kited above it.
Which is a bit, I know a lot of things are said about Hargraves, but I kind of think the Chinese were doing that sort of thing.
They probably were.
Yeah, it's a lot of that. Okay, that must be one of the little pat on your back sort of things too.
Well, I considered only a little hill compared to where I had been flying prior to Stanwell Park.
So you were going down flying in the mountains?
Top of Saddleback Mountain, which is 3 times the height of Stanwell Park. So when I actually flew off Stanwell Park, I thought, well, the first flight was only a glide. I thought, oh, it's only a little glide down to the beach. But the next time, when the wind was nice, being closer to the coast, it was smooth and very pleasant to fly. So I tended to fly Stanwell Park all the time. It was closer to home than some of the other places I went to.
And pretty reliable too.
Yeah, reliable, good conditions.
Where is Saddleback?
That's down near Kiama, about another 60 or 70 k's to the south.
Okay. And you also went down, flew Threadbow and those sort of places?
Yeah, later on. We used to get sponsored trips. We'd go down for a week at the beginning, at the end of the season. And
you were involved in a display team, Sky High or something like that. What was
can't remember what it was called. 35 years ago.
I should know. It's in the Glenn Woodward book.
Yeah, well, I had
Sky Riders.
Sky Riders, yeah. There was Glenn Woodward, Steve Powder, and Ken Greaves and myself. I formed that team to be a demonstration team.
Yep. And you were using winches then? Where did you get the winch from?
I made it.
You made
Used
it?
a 650cc motorbike engine,
Yep.
and I think it was a truck rim for coil the ropes on, and it worked very well if you were very careful with it. It had no, well, it had a clutch on it, so you could feed rope out and put tension back on. But you had to know how to operate it and watch how the hang glider was going up.
Okay. I was just a bit impressed seeing that sort of stuff. So that team was just flying around Australia?
Basically, probably in Victoria and New South Wales, and I think we did a little bit in Queensland, I can't remember.
Yep. Sponsored by Levi's?
Yeah, sponsored by Levi's. Yeah.
Okay. When you started flying, what sort of harness were you using for a start? Were you just in a seat on the Bennett wing?
The very first time, yeah, the swing seat,
Yep.
which you could easily slip out of.
Yeah, no, gutsy stuff just to sit in the swing up high.
Yeah, especially when you realise you're up high. But later on, I made it like a parachute harness.
Yeah.
And then a little belt so that you could lay prone.
Where did you get that sort of harness from? That belt? Did you buy the harness? Did you make it?
I made the original ones, yeah.
That's the CB220.
CB200, I think it is.
200.
Yeah. That triangular shape was to do two things. It was to improve the airfoil, but also was to stabilise the sailcloth. Because we allowed the main wing to lift up, or the main skin,
Yep.
it was to triangulate it so it wouldn't move, and it had an internal pocket in it, just to keep the thing more stable.
The whole thing of the keel pocket, where did that come from? Do you know? The idea of...
Well, it was part of my development originally.
Yep.
I don't know.
I've heard others claim it as one of their great claims to fame.
Well, that was probably one of the first ones that was used on. That's